Hello, Alex here, and in this video I want to talk about the Godox iT30 Pro, the ultimate compact flash that so many people asked for, and Godox really delivered. Let's get into it. Just like with all of my past Godox flash reviews, one of their distributors, LetWell, partnered with me yet again for this video, sending me a copy of the iT30 Pro in the S variant for Sony, which I do get to keep in exchange for me making this video. Links to their Amazon store will be in the video description down below, so do go check them out if you want to purchase any Godox products. I have been using this flash with my Sony camera, obviously, albeit not with this lens for reasons that you'll see later if they aren't immediately obvious. And I don't shoot that much on digital, which is one of the reasons this took me so long to really get together and try out the various features, because there's a lot going on with this flash. But as you'll see, there will be very few film photos in this video for reasons that I'll get into in a bit more later on. Released earlier in 2025 by Godox, the iT30 Pro is a compact and powerful TTL-compatible flash with all the bells and whistles you would come to expect from a modern Godox product, as well as the base fundamental features you might have seen in my review of the iM30 from before, like full manual control and various ways to trigger the flash. There's so much more to this thing than it just being an iM30 plus TTL as some people might expect. If you aren't familiar, TTL Flash is basically a system of protocols which varies by manufacturer, which is why you can't use the Sony variant on a Canon camera and so on, at least not with TTL, whereby the flash and camera will intelligently communicate with each other, talking to each other with things like the ISO, the selected focal length, the aperture that you've chosen, as well as various other features like how the flash syncs, whether you're bouncing off the ceiling, pointing the flash upwards and so on, and it gives you reliable automatic flash control without relying on the fairly easily tricked technology of something like an auto thyristor as seen in the Godox IA32. Godox is starting to build up a pretty consistent naming scheme, as we're starting to see, with the IM series being fully manual, the IA series being automatic with an auto thyristor, and then the IT series, which so far is just one flash like the IA series, having full TTL control for various different brands, including Canon, Nikon, Fuji, Sony, and Olympus. The design is inspired by the discontinued and highly popular Contax TLA200, which is a bit more powerful and works great with the Contax cameras and others, sure, but has no proper TTL and now sells for frankly stupid prices versus just 75 USD or about 85 euros for the iT30 Pro. Inside the box, you get a very hefty manual because there is a ton to talk about here, and I'm not going to be able to go into the depths of every feature this flash offers, as well as a warranty card, a microfiber cloth, and of course the flash itself. Weighing in at around 120 grams and coming in at about 65 by 45 by 45 millimeters, the flash is quite compact and lightweight, though it isn't as small as some of the other flashes in the Godox lineup, which to be fair is expected given the extra feature set, the features that this thing has, as well as the hardware required to provide and support those features. It's still reasonably compact, and in my own personal classification of flashes, it would firmly fit at the very tip top of the scale within the compact or mini flash category. Aside from the metal hot shoe, the exterior is made from plastic, available in either a black or silver colorway, but it's built solidly, and this helps keep both the weight and the cost down. The flash tube is up front with a Fresnel and a stated color temperature of about 6500 Kelvin. It has a stated guide number of 15 meters at ISO 100, putting it in the upper tier of power for mini flashes and on equal footing with the iM30 and the IA32 that I've spoken about before. That flash tube is being used consistently across the lineup. This means it isn't the most powerful flash in existence, and there are slightly more powerful flashes like that TLA200 within a similar form factor, but the versatility of this thing, I would say, outweighs that in a practical sense. The stated recycle time is about 1.5 seconds, and I've averaged about 15 to 16 pops over a 10-second period, so that seems pretty accurate when firing at full power in my own personal experience. The coverage of the flash, or how wide angle the cone of light that comes out of the thing is similar to the iM30 and IA32 in that it definitely covers a 35mm lens easily. 28 for sure, maybe closer to a 26. But it also has a little pop-up diffuser, which softens the light somewhat at the cost of reducing your maximum effective guide number. Not something you need to think about when using the flash in TTL mode. On the left side of the unit, you'll find the Godox logo, a 2.5mm sync port in case you don't have a hot shoe, and a USB Type-C port for charging the internal battery. It's powered by an internal 7.4 volt cell with a 900 mAh capacity rated for up to 550 full power flash pops per charge, though this will vary quite widely depending on the various features that you use, particularly things like high-speed sync. On the right hand side, you'll find a toggle from N normal to W wide, which brings in that diffuser over the flash bulb. Some models of flash have a quick release button on the right hand side as well, but my Sony model has it on the rear of the flash at the back of the hot shoe mount. When you attach the flash, it locks firmly into place with some locating pins, and pushing that button in unlocks the flash for quick dismounting. The main feature on the rear is the, roughly 1.3 inch, 3 centimeters or so LCD touchscreen used for both input as well as various informational displays. After a few seconds of inactivity, the display dims, and then after a full minute it will turn off, though the flash stays on and responsive. Beside that, you have 3 buttons: Set, which is your OK or Confirm button, Menu, which is also used as a back button in various contexts, and the Flash Pop / Power button. When you turn on the flash, you can configure it with an unlock step using the top dial, standard for most modern Godox flashes. The main feature up top is the rotating dial, which is the primary control for adjusting the power level and can be used to scroll through the menus and configure various settings. The only other thing you're going to find up here is the photo cell to allow you to trigger the iT30 Pro using another flash, like a pop-up flash, or an on-camera IM22, for example, if you aren't using Godox's 2.4 GHz wireless system. On the bottom, you've got the hot shoe with the main contact pin for triggering the flash and some locating pins to secure it to your camera body. In the specific case of the Sony variant, Sony use a multifunction shoe with extra contacts in front of the standard shoe plate and not just extra pins in the shoe itself. This makes the shoe mount of the Sony variant longer, and this is why most of these photos are shot on my Sony rather than just on my film cameras. In an ideal world, I would have used it just to test it out on the Sony camera, check out the TTL and HSS and all these things, and then shot with it on film like I normally do. But because this hot shoe is physically too large, if I can mount it to any of my cameras, sure, and it does look good. But because it doesn't insert all the way because of that extra chunk at the front, this, if I were to fire it right now, won't work because the contact pin is not actually touching the hot shoe properly, so I'd have to use it with a sync cable. And that is how I've used it with a couple of film cameras that I've used it with, but in most cases I would just use the iM30 instead. That is a limit of Sony, to be fair, that is how they've designed their multifunction shoe. It's not something Godox are at fault for, but it is something to bear in mind and that I kind of have to disclose. But that's mostly just the exterior and the hardware, and like I said, there is so much more to this flash. It really is not just an iM30 plus TTL metering. It does have that, sure, but there's so much more going on. So let me just give you a quick rundown of the core features, which I will not be able to go into in significant depth. Full manual control from full power down to 1/128th max power in 1/3 stop increments, plus or minus 3 stops of exposure compensation in TTL mode, high-speed sync up to 1/8000th of a second, a strobe mode firing up to 100 times and up to 100 Hz, global shutter support for the few cameras that have that, support for both front and rear curtain sync of course, dual S1 and S2 photocell modes, and lastly, it's fully integrated with the Godox 2.4 GHz radio system. The build quality is very solid with one exception. I mentioned that it is a plastic build, which helps keep cost and weight down, and I don't consider that to be a bad thing by any means. I've been using, Godox flashes for the better part of a decade at this point. I only partnered with LetWell for these videos last year. So at the start of this year, really, end of last year. So, I've had a long history with their products and they've had a significant number of knocks. And short of my old 8200, which blew over at the top of a C-stand during a photo shoot and it obviously got broken, these things have had various knocks and survived. So that's not a problem. But there's one tiny thing that I don't like with the build quality. This top dial feels absolutely fantastic to use. There's no problem there. It feels fine. The tactile feedback is good, but it's very loud, which if you're in a situation where you need to be silent, whether you're using electronic shutter or just a muted shutter on your camera, but you're able to use flash, which is going to be a non-zero number of people, the noise might be distracting in certain situations, but you can always use the touchscreen to control your various settings if you have to, but just listen. It's quite loud and it's not like a nice sound. I only mention that because my TT685 and V100 are significantly quieter. They're much more muted and thumpy rather than clicky sounds, which, if that's the only thing I have to say about the build quality, is not a big deal, let's be honest. But for someone out there, that might be a factor worth considering. Godox 2.4 GHz integration is absolutely massive. That means you can use this flash as a trigger for your other flashes over radio, not just using photocells and optical triggering. You can actually use this as a master or commander trigger, which is actually even more impressive considering that this is 5 to 10 euros cheaper than I think it's called the X Pro 3, the current generation wireless trigger, which to be fair is smaller, and you might not want to use a flash as your trigger. But having that option either to trigger other flashes or use it in your suite of flashes as a smaller, less powerful option alongside an 8200, a V100 or something else off camera, triggered by a radio trigger, is wonderful. And it's very easy to sync everything together, assign your channels and set the various power levels. It's extremely intuitive to use. And similarly, the user interface is carried over from the higher end flashes. So if you're used to how the modern generation of Godox flashes like the TT685 Mark III or the V100 or these kind of flashes, or I guess the V1, I presume that was one of the first flashes to have this modern UI. If you know how those work, it's slightly different because it's smaller with fewer buttons than those big flashes, fair enough. But you'll feel right at home and it's very easy to adapt to get, okay, if you're a working professional in any capacity, muscle memory and familiarity are big deals, and being able to know, use familiar icons and the overall menu structure being the same, or at least extremely similar, is not something you can completely ignore. And I think that adds some more value to this flash in terms of its broad usability if you're going to use this thing for work. But talking about the user interface, having the option to either use the dials and buttons or the touchscreen itself to work through the various menus is very nice. Personally, I prefer using the buttons most of the time, but there are certain things where flashes on the camera and I can just flick my thumb up and down and left and right to get to various menu options, and that's very nice. Or similarly, if I want to adjust the flash power up and down really quickly, I can just drag my finger all the way to the right or all the way to the left. Similarly, same thing with TTL, where I can adjust the exposure compensation all the way up and down. The only thing I'd like to see there would be an option to rapidly reset it to 0, which I imagine could come in a firmware update, but that's not really a big deal. Having the versatility of the two different kind of interface modes, if you want to call it that, I don't know, UX and UI terminology, is just nice to have, much like any of the other modern Godox flashes. And like I've said with the iM30, IA32 and so on, the decently high max power of this thing, certainly relative to its size, its high max power means you have a solid high power flash when you need it and faster recycle times when you don't. Especially with this thing having an internal cell, a 1.5 second recycle time at full power is very quick. And if you drop the power down, you're able to get this thing to fire much, much more rapidly. Like I mentioned in the multi-flash strobe mode, you can fire at up to 100 Hertz. That's a 0.01 second recycle time in theory, which is absolute insanity. Of course, your maximum flash power is very low when you're doing that, but the fact that you have this whole spectrum where you can fire very quickly is very good, because for certain types of photography, you're going to want to use an on-camera flash like this in burst mode, which you're going to be able to do more easily than if it were weaker. Certainly when you're able to crank the ISO to even 400 or 800, drop the flash power down a little bit, you're going to be able to keep up with modern burst rates very easily. Of course, I have a color mismatch versus my Sony camera, but consider it on a silver camera, this thing is stunning. The aesthetic design is absolutely gorgeous. I think it fits on so many cameras so well. I'll throw up a couple of pictures of this flash attached to black cameras in the black colorway, and especially if your camera has a flat top, because most of these flashes look a bit silly with certain cameras that have like a digital prism bump for their EVF. Fair enough, that's just an inherent design thing. This flash aesthetically is gorgeous. I know some people didn't like the design of the iM30. They thought it was a bit cheap or utilitarian looking, and that did seem to change with the iM20 and iM22. They have a slightly different design language, so to speak. This iT30 Pro is stunning. And that isn't the most important thing in the world, but when you're paying more for a flash like this, it's nice that it comes in, that money goes to various things like just generally making it look nicer. Of all the mini flashes I've tested to date, this thing has the greatest number of options to actually trigger it. You can trigger obviously with the hot shoe, if you have a hot shoe on your camera, or a 2.5mm sync port using a cable if you don't have a hot shoe, if you only have a cold shoe, you're using it handheld Gildan style or whatever. You can use it optically, trigger it optically using the photocell in S1 or S2 mode for normal photography or red eye reduction photography. And then fourthly, because it has 2.4 gigahertz compatibility, you can trigger it by radio rather than optically, remotely and wirelessly using a Godox trigger or another Godox flash. That just gives you more options to work with it, and you don't have to use them all the time, but they're always there, and it just gives you the maximum range of versatility with the caveat of the Sony multifunction shoe, allowing you to use it on as many different cameras in your collection as possible, giving you the greatest possible utility out of it. Lastly, I think this is the smallest and certainly in this class most powerful flash to offer both high-speed sync and global shutter support. The latter I haven't used because I don't own a global shutter camera, but I've used HSS a couple of times and it is so nice. Being able to go above the maximum flash sync speed of my camera and shoot at wider apertures in the middle of the day without needing to use an ND filter, which especially, okay, maybe not with my general Sony lens, but if you're using something like the 28-70 GM Mark II, which some people have had good results with this flash, being able to shoot at f2.8 in the middle of the day and not have to carry like an 82mm ND filter, that's very nice. There are limitations to HSS, but being able to shoot at up to 1/8000th of a second with flash is definitely going to be very nice for certain people in quite a number of situations. I have to be honest, although I can't get the full utility out of this flash with my own personal collection of cameras, given that I can't just pop it on any of my hot shoe cameras because of Sony's decision with the multifunction shoe, there are very few negative things to say about this. It really is a very complete overall package. The main objective and inarguable thing is that its small size, it's not a very tall flash, means that long lenses are going to cause shading in your frame. The lens that I'm using is absolutely gargantuan. I mean, it's obnoxiously large. Like I mentioned, some people have been using the 24-70 2.8 GM Mark II from Sony, and other people have had good results with lenses as large as the Nikkor 24-120mm f4. But wider angle lenses, in particular, are going to suffer with shading if the lens simply gets in the way of the cone of the flash. Particularly if you're using it with wider angle, again, something like 16-35 might be a problem if you're using the diffuser. But Godox do offer risers, one that's just a spacer and another one that offers a tilt feature. With TTL support, they have TTL pass-through for the various different mounts, but still, as a small flash, you're going to have to think about this. If you threw a regular size speed light like a 685, 350 or V100 onto your camera, that's not going to be a concern whatsoever because those flashes are just so much taller. At around 80 to 85 euros, I don't think the flash is overpriced at all considering its extremely broad feature set, but at that price you're starting to directly compete with things like the TT350 series, lower end, proper speed lights, and they do offer extra things like the tilting head. Sure, you can get the adapter, but speed lights like that tend to have a zooming head where you can change the focal length, giving you a higher guide number with longer focal length lenses. You have the diffuser, which brings you out to a much wider focal length, typically around 14mm. And you have a lot more options for tilt, like you can tilt the head up and down, sure, like with the iA32 or a riser adapter with the iT30 Pro, but you can also spin the head around so you can bounce it off the ceiling while you're still shooting in portrait mode, which gives you a bit more versatility. So you have to kind of weigh up your priorities, which makes this thing not bad value, but less of an obvious clear winner for some people, which I think might impact sales because some people might end up buying something else just because it's maybe not, the Apple ladder effect. It's not much more expensive to go for a 685, certainly a Gen 2, so people might end up doing that. I know this is severe nitpicking, but I've said it before and I'll say it again. Why is this not an iA30 Pro? Why is there no thyristor in here, Godox? If you put a thyristor into one of these things, then anyone other than a Sony user can use one flash on any camera, and fine, forget about film cameras for a moment. There are brands like Panasonic and Leica for which Godox doesn't support TTL functionality. Just a couple of days after I recorded this video, Godox have actually gone and announced the iT30 Pro will be coming with Leica compatible TTL in the near future. It's still in development and there's no word about whether the iT20 or iT22 will be included in this, but I presume they would be down the line. But that is still great news to see, though my overall message about wanting a thyristor in a flash with this overall form factor still stands. So if you had a flash like this with even just a thyristor, that would give Leica and Panasonic shooters or Ricoh shooters a certain degree of automation in a flash that's much smaller than the IA32. I still think that that is the kind of end goal, the ultimate evolutionary form, the carcinization of compact flashes. That's where we really should be going. Even if it increases the cost a bit more, sure, whatever. Fine, you're going to take over the market if you make an IA30. So those are my thoughts on the Godox iT30 Pro. For the vast majority of people, this thing is a straight upgrade from the IM30 and completely supplants it. Like, if you're not shooting with a Sony camera and buying the Sony S version as your TTL, protocol brand, this thing just destroys the IM30. HSS, global shutter support, multi-strobe, more options for triggering it, the ability to be a trigger, as well as the general stuff I mentioned, like full integration into the Godox ecosystem with the radio 2.4 gigahertz support, as well as a familiar user interface. It just fits right in. And that's what I was kind of getting at earlier. If you want a small compact TTL flash for your camera, say for an A6700 or like a Z50 Mark II, something like this, but you already have Godox flashes, the ability to integrate with those might make it better value or a better proposition than a small compact native TTL flash, unless there's some specific feature in there that this doesn't have. But having things like HSS and global shutter support are absolutely huge. Like I said, this is really truly not just an IM30 plus TTL, which some people I've seen kind of speculate before the launch that it would be and worry that it would be. But oh no, this thing is really packing everything that Godox have in their kind of technological toolkit, except an auto thyristor, into the smallest possible package for a price that sure is more expensive than the manual flashes, but I think is justified. If you're not looking for a speed light like the TT350 series, this thing is a very easy recommendation, and it is, for most people, the ultimate compact hybrid flash to use across multiple cameras. No questions asked. Using this alongside my IM30 has been really pleasant, and it's just a bit of a disappointment that for me it can't personally completely replace it. But c'est la vie. I'd like to thank LetWell again for their ongoing support, for which I am sincerely grateful, so do check out their Amazon store links in the video description down below if you want to pick up a Godox flash or one of the various accessories available for them. But that is all I have to say for this video, so stay safe, and bye bye for now. If you don't already, follow me on Instagram at Shaka1277 for new pictures every day. If you liked this video and enjoy what I do on the channel, please consider subscribing or checking out my Patreon, where the tiers start at just €1 per month.